Hey RATBAGGERS, it's Jay, today giving you my yearly list of top survival games incoming for 2025 and a small section for 2026. This list is going to be filled with more mature, either open world or maybe even slight extraction style survival games that I'm really keen on following in 2025-26. From tropical paradises to fantasy and of course usual zombies. But if you're looking for something a bit lighter, maybe a bit more chill or unique art style, check out my 21 adventure survival games list video. But today we are focusing on a bit more nitty gritty, a bit more definitely adrenaline pumping. Let me know what game is piquing your interest the most. Make sure you subscribe to hear the best in survival games, news, guides, gameplay and reviews, and let's go. The first of quite a few sequels you're going to see in this list, Breathedge 2. This was a space survival game set in the midst of a universe where chickens and fart humour was pretty much the order of the day. Nothing seems to be changing too much for the sequel, although they are expanding massively on the gameplay systems themselves, with multiple now star systems to go and explore, maybe not on the same kind of level as No Man's Sky, but certainly a lot more than the base game had, with planets to drive or roam around, gathering resources, supplies, upgrading your ship, and trying to placate and keep your crew members happy. If you don't maybe match up to their expectations, they may turn around and not give you the reception you expect. You either loved or hated the first one's jokes and many gags, let's see how the second one shapes up. From moderately funny to moderately serious, this is The Alters, where you are trying to survive by cloning yourself on an alien planet. At various points you're going to have to resurrect or basically create DNA clones of yourself that will then eventually have the abilities and the know-how to help you survive and progress. You might need someone that has got more skills in engineering, and so you'll have to literally grow yourself a clone, keep them moderately happy and maybe not going mad and stabbing you in the back, and then carry on trying to survive in a very harsh world. It really does seem to be the focus of the game, is getting to know your clones and your crew better and develop relationships with them so that you can progress. All the while trying to move your massive wheel-spaced hub to hopefully avoid the burning sun rays, find more rarer resources, and maybe, just maybe, make an escape off the planet. Made by the same creators of This War Is Mine, expect an emotional survival game scheduled for release early 2025. So from happy to sad to maybe a bit more creative, this is Space Engineers 2, just literally announced in the last couple of days. The sequel to one of the biggest simulation survival space games going is happening apparently in 2025. They've been releasing small little teasers of this game for the last few weeks or month or so, and their full official reveal trailer just came out. So expect, yes, multiplayer action, yes, maybe refined graphics, and hopefully a lot better optimization, especially if they do get around to releasing it on console, as currently the console versions are a bit of a mess. Still a bit light about concrete details, but I would expect it to have some of the stuff I mentioned, like being multiplayer focused, and hopefully having a bit more survival elements to it, as it hasn't always been more of a simulation game. But yeah, we'll find out more info in the future, I'm sure. Satisfactory has been massively popular over the last few years, as has been the rise of automation, so it's no surprise that more and more survival crafting games are trying to add it in some way, shape or form. The creators of Green Hell are going very different in their next game, sci-fi, pretty much fighting huge hordes of bugs and creatures as you build and automate your base. All the while trying to make sure that you can do this before some solar storms and other natural kind of phenomenons maybe wipe out any life that's on the surface. Really interesting premise. It is going to be a co-op focused game, this one. I love the idea of having pod based building and setting up these kind of big production factories and facilities, but also having a bit of danger. That's the one thing that kind of always put me off really getting into Satisfactory. I needed something to shoot at, and certainly these bugs look like they deserve shooting. Green Hell was massively popular, and once it released out of early access it continued to get updates, and they eventually put the console versions right as well with a slew of updates to keep it pretty much on track. So good, hard-working, honest devs that have kept their fan base engaged a lot of the time, and I would expect more the same with Star Rupture. I'm just hoping it does definitely marry together, that the automation really is deep automation, and the threat and the danger elements of either these storms and natural phenomena, as well as the bugs, really keep it engaging. I would expect this to drop at some point mid to late 2025. From outer space to surviving under the actual surface of Mars, that's what Blind Descent is offering, when it hopefully releases in 2025, as it first got announced a good few years ago, and we haven't really seen enough of actual proper gameplay as of yet. What is it? It's a co-op survival crafting game set on the Martian alien landscape, but underground in deep and huge caves and caverns, so hopefully avoiding your eyes popping out your head a la Total Recall. It does somewhat remind me of maybe Green Hell, but with a bit more of an alien spin, as you do the basics of chopping trees down, building bases and trying to survive against a whole host of creatures. So I'm kind of hoping it does really maybe blend a bit more sci-fi and futuristic stuff into the game, but they are trying to work with a lot of aspects. They're going to be adding story to the game, so that's going to be a big focus once it fully releases, but it will be an early access title, like the vast majority of these games in this list today. More unique thing that might be added to the game as well is the ability to go ahead and climb pretty much anything and utilise certain aspects of travel like boats, ships and more to get around while you're trying to find enough resources to keep upgrades going and survive just a bit longer. I've already featured Subnautica 2 in my cozy crafting adventure games list because that's exactly what Subnautica can be, but it can also be a terrifyingly scary game. Plunging the depths, coming across reapers, or just the fear of deep ocean water. So expect more of the same in the sequel. Now with added co-op 1 to 4 players, a brand new planet and all new creatures to go and face off against, with a whole new story and a lot more. One of my favourite survival games, the depths and the prettiness of the open waters and the alien-like reefs, creatures and more has always been astounding if I can just get past the scary stuff, with a reaper trying to kiss you and rip your face off at the same time. With improved, upgraded or even brand new vehicles and the thrill of having now a companion or two with you, I think Subnautica 2 of course is going to be one of the biggest survival games going in 2025. It's also going to be releasing on Xbox Game Preview at the same time as Steam while it goes through early access, so great to see once more, and I'll expect more news about this in January at the next Xbox Direct event. But for sure, one of my top 3 hype games of 2025. Light motiram has absolutely gained attention for seemingly being a carbon copy of the Horizon Zero series. Bright, colourful, animalistic mechs that you'll be fighting with bows and maybe a bit more futuristic weapons is seemingly the order of the day. Of course, this game though does add the full crafting, base building, survival aspects that you would expect. It is made by Tencent and it is going to be coming to PC, mobile and consoles in the future. Not too sure even if it's going to be a paid game or they might offer some sort of microtransactions to buy. So yeah, my kind of hype meter for this has maybe gone down somewhat, as I'm really not into games like Once Human that have just a billion loot boxes and stuff in it to really get anything decent. And I'm not a big fan of mobile games. No matter how much Once Human might be engaging for some, it still just felt like a bit of a cheap mobile survival experience that I could maybe have better elsewhere. Is that going to be the case with this? Well, if you like the Horizon Zero series and you've always wanted more base building survival aspects and the ability to play with others, then maybe this is really going to do it for you. The boss fights do look pretty bombastic and the skill set and weapon sets do look pretty interesting. So fingers crossed the game doesn't get ruined by a whole bunch of DLCs and microtransactions and ends up being somewhat good, even if it has been heavily inspired by games like Horizon. I may piss off a few survival purists by including a few instruction games, but they do offer that pure basis of survival, gathering loot, getting resources and surviving to either the end of the round or to escape the map. For sure there's a lot more I could potentially include, so look out for a video focusing on just extraction style games in the future, but I definitely want to make sure they had elements of survival. There we go, big long explanation why you might see a couple in this list, and Nakwon Last Paradise is probably the best example. A third-person zombie apocalyptic stealth survival game is what it says on Steam, and you'll be running around a abandoned city filled with zombies trying to gather loot and hopefully not using any kind of guns or making too much noise that could alert the horde. Strategy might play a big part as you'll be coming up against other players or deciding to work together to survive. And that's what really draws me to this game. It won't offer that persistent online open world, nor will it have base building and the usual you're used to, but that cooperative or PvP in a world that's going to be very dangerous that you'll only survive in for a while, that's really appealing to me. It's been teased for a good while now, a couple of years at least, so I'm expecting absolutely some sort of release date for 2025. They've had a bunch of alphas recently, they all look to be pretty running well, so yeah, looking forward to hopefully not alerting every zombie in the city. This next guy definitely needs some of that if he steps foot in the outside. Of course, this is Atomfall, made by Rebellion, the makers of the Sniper series. This is honestly looking pretty fantastic. It's set in a futuristic version of a real life event that happened in the 50s in Britain when a nuclear reactor had some sort of issue. In this version, the town around it has been shut down and various different forces are now vying for control or trying to hide and stop people from discovering the truth. You're one of them that is trying to make your way through, surviving, upgrading, getting weapons and gear as you explore and uncover the mysteries of Windscale. Dubbed Fallout UK, I'm totally down with that, to be honest. It looks great. You're fighting, you're shooting, you can take all different types of methods to take on enemies, and looks to be a rich variety of creatures and locations to go and discover. I think people do forget about certain British media like Doctor Who and a lot of 70s and 80s sci-fi shows, which apparently a lot of this game, Atomfall, is actually based on. Not strictly sure what survival elements really make it a survival game, as it doesn't look to be fully you need food, but more just a case of going around and crafting your own gear and guns and weapons. So maybe a bit of a survival light, but that's what they are describing it as an action open world RPG survival game. So yeah, I'm getting my cricket bat ready, absolutely my china for a good cup of tea, and hopefully be running around shooting robots and shouting Geronimo every time I come across a mutant. Even though we're nearly 13 minutes into the video, this game is actually the first to have a confirmed release date of the 27th of March, coming to Xbox, PlayStation, PC, but also Xbox Game Pass. Absolutely in my top 5 of hype games this year. Chernobylite 2 Exclusion Zone is scheduled for 2025, and it is obviously a sequel to the first Chernobylite. Yes, you are going to be running around in the Exclusion Zone, pretty much where Chernobyl was, and very similar to other more popular games recently like Stalker. But I would say this holds its own as having a bit more psychological, bit more sci-fi element to the game, even if it doesn't quite match up to Stalker. The original game had you upgrading your base, giving new crafting stations to unlock new gear, and then go and venture out and take a little gander around some of the zones to get more resources. So that all looks to be expanded massively in number 2, with an emphasis on talking to more NPCs, exploring even more crazy locations, especially infused with, I would say, absolutely Cthulhu inspired themes, and yeah, taking on giant mechs with big balls. So don't judge this one harshly just because it's set in the same kind of area and kind of premise as the original Stalker games. This one actually does have its own merits for sure. I'm pretty sure I'm dubbing this section in my little chapters on YouTube as the weird and wonderful, or maybe a bit scary. This is the next one, and it's Outbreak Island. Another one that's been long developed. This has had a ton of demos over the years. First got announced like back in 2021. The original premise was that you would be discovering certain anomalies on an island after trying to investigate the disappearance of your wife and maybe a crashed airplane, and yet you was just an everyday man journalist trying to survive against weird creatures in masks. Well, that seems to have evolved now into fully fledged mutant style enemies and a lot of gun action. Various demos that I've had have improved over in time, and looks to be more about base settling rather than base fully building, as you'll be able to decorate your homes, upgrade and customize your guns, weapons and gear, and modes of transport. For sure, the latest gameplay does maybe reduce that element of discovery and maybe investigating certain aspects, and puts it a bit more in the universe of just open world crafting, survival and upgrading your homestead. So I'm a little bit sad, as the original had you using your camera to maybe scare off enemies and maybe document certain goings on. Hopefully some of that stuff does remain, as it felt pretty interesting, but this is all looking pretty good as well. So I guess just about finishing our spooky survival, this is Pioner, another MMO style game, and very much inspired again by post-apocalyptic goings on with weird mutant creatures everywhere. Maybe Fallout in Russia? They've just put out their Steam page and have announced that they will be releasing next year, after having the kind of usual rubbish of being able to buy and support the game on their own website, which is always a bit dubious. But this does seem to be the real deal. Imagine Stalker, but as an even weirder game set in a MMO world. There'll be save zones that you can go and trade, barter, upgrade and get better gear, and then hopefully try and survive as you explore and do stuff with your friends and pals in teams. But then there will be elements where you'll go into the PvP zones and have to fight for your life, not just from mutants and weird 8-legged creatures, but also other players too. Pretty gory, definitely got a artistic style with it that gives a little nod to maybe the 2000s era of gaming, where everything had that sepia yellow put on it. Gunplay looks pretty good, I have to say, and I'm always a bit of a sucker for PvP games occasionally, but not so much getting my face caved in by a mutant killer bear. So big, deep story, lots of scares, lots of creatures, and lots of players calling you absolute trash every time you down them and take their loot. Absolutely huge 50km style map, not to mention a ton of dungeons that you'll be partaking in too. This game could be special. Couple winter, a la the cold, snow-based survival games now, Polyaris has you pretty much skiing across country trying to survive. Set in a post-nuclear procedurally generated Arctic world according to their Steam page. It's definitely very early stages, although it's meant to be scheduled for Q2. Made by a tiny little team, it does look actually pretty interesting. I know we've got the long dark at home for cold survival, but it doesn't mean we can have any other fresh takes. And utilising skis to get around, I would say that's pretty unique, as well as the procedural generation, as long as it remains interesting. Fighting big killer polar bears, potentially other threatening humans, but mostly left alone on an island after some sort of nuclear incident. Story's pretty intriguing, and as long as the gameplay can match, I think this is going to be a winner. What I don't want is overcomplicated survival mechanics, where it's a simulation based and takes half an hour to do anything like cook a fish. What I do want is stunning locations, mysterious places, and the ability to gather lots of resources from points of interest that really matter, and not get overly boring just going ahead and looting nuts, bolts and old cans. The environments look solid, the animations look pretty good, and yeah, I'll be covering this for sure with more details. So perhaps you want to survive in the cold, but maybe do it with a friend so you can have a good cuddle, then maybe the Permafrost game is for you. I know a bunch of these games are close together, they're all going to just meld into each other. But this one obviously has a third person focus, and definitely more elements of city or large town where you go and explore, but also the addition of a doggo. Seems to also have more traditional base building elements that you're used to in a lot of survival games as you explore different points of interest and try and find some sort of remnants of humanity. Slightly ahead in the future in the year 2035 when clearly something's gone wrong with the moon. It's had a demo up for a little while now, so you go and check it out. And I think the addition of a doggo is definitely going to appeal to some players. No set quarter, just 2025 listed. From the wintry and of course cold to maybe a little bit more hot and sandy. This is Sand, an extraction style survival game. I enjoyed some of the beta, although it was clunky and very rough around the edges, and they've got another one coming up very soon, so I would expect this to release at some point mid to late next year. What is it? It's in a retro, different alternate reality where basically the space age race was won by the Russians. Or something along them lines. It transformed the fortunes of planet Earth, and spacefarers went and explored other planets to try and get resources. So you are now on the planet of Sophie, trying to get enough scraps and stuff to survive and hopefully upgrade your mechanical walkers as you take on other players while doing so. Published by Tiny Build, who have made games recently, or published at least games like Deadside and obviously Duckside. I think this could have potential for sure. It's a shame it hasn't been developed more into an open world survival game. The extraction shoot aspects are pretty much there. You'll land down on the planet, go and get your resources, try and avoid getting janked by a bunch of other players, and hopefully escape and extract with your airship. But I did like the central premise. It reminded me a little bit of Last Oasis, if maybe a bit more clunky, and I absolutely love that game before it kind of got ruined by its own devs. Doesn't look like it's going to be any kind of offline or single player modes for this, strictly PvP, online only. Bring your buckets and shovels, boys, and I'll make sure I bring the sunscreen. It's kind of crazy it's taken this long to try and come up with the idea of a survival game set in the Terminator universe. Just think of all that future war where we've got obviously the mechs and the big drone ships targeting the remnants of humanity. Terminator Survivors is maybe not that though. It's still actually set in relatively modern times, in fact just after the first Judgment Day, where you and some of your friends can play cooperatively, gathering resources and fighting against a relatively small number of the T1000 machines. Or T800, I don't know, I can't remember, I'm old and I'm not a nerd. Originally scheduled for the end of 2024, no release date has been given after its first initial delay, but I'm hoping it will come out next year and expecting it to play out a bit like Generation Zero. And yeah, I can't wait to be humming the music, dun 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 dun, the whole time I literally stream and play this game. So moving on slightly to fantasy and historical, of course I'm going to be mentioning Light No Fire. Another one that's going to be making a whole ton of different survival lists, maybe even MMO. We still don't know the full details about exactly how many players will be able to connect, but we do know it's going to be a co-op focused affair. They're not about to start making it PvP, and it does retain a lot of the same elements that you've got used to with No Man's Sky. Of course, this is made by Hello Games, the makers of both Now This and that game. Set on a Earth, apparently, with procedural generation, so that you'd still be able to have new experiences each and every time that you play. The typical base building, gathering loops are there. But obviously a fantasy based Earth, with huge, massive hummingbirds and dragons to ride as your mounts, ships, as well as maybe water tames. Every mountain can be climbed, every vista can actually be explored, and there's a ton of oceans and continents that players will never have set foot on until you actually landed. All sounds too good to be true, and it's very reminiscent of something else in the works by PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, really excited for this. Obviously, I think this rounds out, I've mentioned it a few times in my hyped games, this definitely is one of them. Question is, when is it going to release? When are we going to see more details or news? I kind of was expecting a big reveal at the Game Awards, but it was still relatively quiet. So I would expect maybe, hopefully, it might release by the end of 2025. But if not, it could be another one that we don't see till 2026. Let's just hope it's not as buggy a bad launch as No Man's Sky. Even if that game has come good absolutely a million times over, it still obviously needs to hit properly in the right way this time. Endalor is a brand new PvP medieval dark fantasy survival game, 1 to 4 players as you explore, gather resources, take on lots of fantastical foes, and it's definitely giving me vibes of maybe Dark Souls if it was made by a small tiny little team. It has got that kind of polygon character style, which I'm not a big fan of since I see the certain packs being used over and over again in certain games, where it does look like this has been customised somewhat to make it stand out a little bit more. But the creatures look great. I actually like the atmosphere. I'm digging maybe the RPG nature of it as well. And so if it can manage all of that together, make combat and PvP something exciting as you explore, all set on a hand-drawn made map, no procedural generation here, definitely going to give me some old school vibes. This wasn't on my Game Awards hit list this year, but I'm kind of pleased to see it. Elden Ring nightreign. Yes, apparently a survival game, and not in just the Japanese literal sense they apply to pretty much any kind of horror. Fine, you might not necessarily be eating and drinking, or nor will you be crafting and base building. In fact, it's pretty much more of a challenge roguelike game. But everywhere I'm turning, I'm seeing the words survival, and it is a case of surviving the first 2 days in a mixed match of Elden Ring locations, possibly interspersed with some Dark Souls, as you try and build up the strength and courage to take on a final boss. That blue ring doesn't signify it's a battle royale, but it is something to promote and get you to keep going, and obviously stop you from getting too overpowered before you take on the final challenge. It's going to have so many different enemies from the Elden Ring, and again, maybe from the Dark Souls series, with all the same movesets. The crucial difference seems to be that you can move a little bit faster, the speed of traversal, and the ways that you'll be moving around as you interact with 2 other players, 3-player co-op max, or play it on your own, and you've got a choice of 8 different classes. Set on a handcrafted world, but different events may happen depending on what kind of makeup your group is. It's really offering something I think special, and definitely a big departure from software. Or from software, I should say. I've never been that great at these games. I've not even played Elden Ring, so this will be a challenge for me to get into, but I'm definitely up for it because it does look amazing. I'm well up for this kind of limited time-based challenge. So no, not a strict survival game in the purest sense, but still something that you'll have to survive to get to the end, and so it's just about an excuse to make my list. I'm amazed it's taken Toplitz this long to realise they could probably make Viking Dynasty, and that's exactly what just got announced as I record in this video. Expect more of the mechanics that you've seen in their previous ones. Prefab blueprint building structures that you then put the resources in to make your own settlements, hopefully keep the people happy as you try and survive gathering resources in whatever age it is. Obviously the Vikings has been overplayed somewhat maybe in certain places. Valheim is massive still, and we've got games like Asker still doing pretty good recently. But this does seem to be a bit more grounded take on it, with only certain elements like blessings and runes from offerings to the gods, with the rest of it being a bit more historical. It will launch as a single player game, but we know from so many of their previous ones they have managed to tack on multiplayer eventually, so this could be something they add. But yeah, 2025 Viking Dynasty. A more colourful, maybe fantastical take on survival, this is Stormforge, 1 to 8 players across procedure generated worlds with seemingly some sort of editor that players can make their own. Again, I did include this on my previous Crafting This Survival video, but I figure it's still an open world and it's got quite a bit of blood and gore considering it's got this kind of cel shaded art style. Also retains a lot of what you expect from open world crafting games, base building, even tree huts, mansions against cliffs, and a lot of seemingly myths from not just the Viking era but others too. We'll be utilising magic from these amazing storms, taking on all sorts of ogres and hopefully try and survive. Brendan Green, the dude that pretty much made and conceived so many of your favourite battle royales like obviously PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and many more in the past, is working on his own brand new survival game. In fact, a whole bunch of new projects, including a new engine where they're basically simulating Earth. You'll be able to procedurally generate Earth-like biomes, and effectively these will be maps that you'll have to survive on, with the goal to get across an 8 by 8 kilometre square map with potentially weather hazards and maybe some of the more basic elements of survival, like having a compass and potentially either base building or exploring kind of ruins, log cabins and more. That's the promise, and that's the building block they're adding to eventually make Prologue. But their survival take of this is going to be called Go Way Back, and that will be releasing in Q2 2025. Whether or not some simple weather systems that might cause things like flooding and a lot more can be enough to make it a compelling survival game, I'm not too sure, but absolutely you cannot doubt Brendan Green and his history. Right now you can try the tech demo where you can just run around aimlessly with no gameplay interactions really on some of these landscapes, helping them generate and get data if that's kind of your bag. So finishing off what I expect to release in 2025 is Jumpship. Again, not a full-blown traditional survival game in the sense that a lot of you would expect. Instead, more about keeping your ship alive as you go on these challenging runs. Effectively, missions that you'll take on with 1 to 4 players against all sorts of mechs, drones and more, gathering resources from points of interest on planets or in space, and yes, keeping your ship alive. Completing successful missions will give you more items to go ahead and use to upgrade your ship or your characters. I really like the mix here of going onto a planet, taking on all sorts of maybe creatures, and then actually space dogfight battles with the ability to move between the ships using a grapple or just simply spacewalking. It all seems to be a huge, great mix. Coming in 2025, I definitely expect this to be early to mid, and yeah, very excited. For sure, I may get some of these release dates wrong. It's all just based on what research I could find, but the next lot I reckon will launch 2026. Stranded Deep 2 is in development. They've only just got to the stage where they've took on some feedback, having a questionnaire where players could talk about what they liked about the original, what they maybe didn't like. The original was made by literally a 2-man team. That has now changed somewhat as one of the lead creators is spearheading a brand new studio mixed in with some developers who made Space Engineers 2 to work on this new sequel. The original offered island survival, co-op experience, you and a friend or two, taking on certain boss-like creatures and obviously trying not to get bit by sharks. How can it expand? Definitely more variety in the biomes, more unique ways to craft items, and definitely make it a bit easier and simpler. Oh yeah, and improve that story ending for sure. Canyons is made by the same people behind Breathedge, so they've got 2 games potentially releasing in 2025. This is why I'm putting this as a likelihood 2026 release. It hasn't showed off any real gameplay, any snippets, and it doesn't seem to be generating much buzz in terms of dev blogs or anything else. What is it? It is a survival game where you'll be fighting off against zombies or alien style mutants at the very least in a desert and canyon environment. The big difference is you'll have access to a whole plethora of different vehicles, from dune buggies like this to maybe big giant ships that you'll be able to upgrade. If you saw my crafting videos of 2021, you might have seen Survival Machine. A polygon kind of, I would say, more colourful kid friendly approach to this type of game, and this seems to be the much more mature counterpart with loads of bugs to shoot as well. Definitely looks a bit more dangerous, and yeah, upgrading these giant massive ships to hopefully survive long enough not just against creatures and weird mutants but also massive storms. It's going to be either single player or co-op focused, and I expect it to probably more than likely release in early 2026 Steam. And no one mentioned that the mutants look like they belong in Metal Gear Survival. Renown has been around a while now, first getting its announcement a good few years ago, and work has proceeded very well. I interviewed the developers a while ago and I was a bit dubious about maybe their credentials, but they are proving me wrong. They seem to be opening up betas and demos, and with each one it definitely seems to be getting a lot better. Take somewhat skilled combat that you've seen in games like Mordau and then add it to a open world medieval survival experience where you'll be base building, have zones to go and trade and barter, and maybe also organise tournaments, and you kind of get the idea. The devs want this to be Rust but medieval style. Now, despite having a bunch of technical tests, I still don't want to label it as 2025, as they've only just actually announced a new Kickstarter, seemingly needing more funds to carry on development, so that's why I'm kind of putting this as a 2026 release. But yeah, I'm totally down to hack and smash my way through to a TC cupboard in this new one. 2025 is already starting to be a big year for Microsoft, with the announcements of certain games like Fable, Outer Worlds 2 releasing, as well as Avowed. They've also got a ton of other stuff happening, so I just can't see State of Decay 3 actually happening in 2025. We finally got updated new trailer shown off in the summer, interspersed with some CGI and in-game actual shots and clips. And it seems to be more of the same of what to expect. Gone is the idea it might end up being a big MMO style like DayZ. It is going to be still a co-op experience where you and up to 4 players, by the looks of things, will be able to travel around, hopefully decapitating lots of zombies and trying to stay alive. There are some changes though. Instead of it being just a co-host optional experience where you literally will join your friend and then pretty much have to go back to your own world, you will now be able to share worlds. They've lifted this feature directly from one of their sister studios, Grounded's Obsidian, which also implemented this shared world feature, and so it's pretty unique. Not quite full-blown dedicated servers, but still giving the ability for you to carry on your adventures just because your friend's gone off for dinner. That seems to be the big massive change, I would say, from this one. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they do release it in 2025, but yeah, I can't see it happening. Going back to the medieval era now with Blight Survival, another one that's been often promised and teased. This has a feel of, again, a roguelike, where you and certain friends will be able to join a world, take on all sorts of medieval zombies, trying to get maybe riches to progress to a next area, or hopefully some sort of boss fight. Where this differentiates from Renown, it is more of an extraction style game. You'll have to decide whether or not it's the time to leave with your loot or maybe press on to the next part of the adventure and hopefully not die and lose it all. I think the graphics and the art in this game look absolutely astounding, and if they can really mix in and blend that co-op feeling that you really do need to rely on your friends to survive, it could be something pretty good. Still a bit of a shame they're not adding maybe PvP mechanics to it. I would have loved that aspect too. But hey ho, we'll have to see how it goes anyway if it does eventually launch, which I'm not expecting until 2026. Rooted caused a storm with its marketing when it first got announced, aping the literal look and feel of The Last of Us, but a survival game. So that's kind of still where they're at, but their whole host of new additions have gone into it. It is very much an open world post-apocalyptic survival game you come to expect, running around lots of empty buildings, coming away with bottle caps and shoelaces as your best loot, maybe. They mix in together the base building elements, but then go and explore in larger towns and maybe even cities with a focus maybe on verticalness. Add to that zip lines, maybe vehicles, and yeah, it could be interesting. It is going to offer some sort of PvP experience too. While it's had a bunch of alphas recently, I still think this is relatively early in the game for it to be released in 2025. It could be absolutely huge and the next game changer in PvP open world survival like Rust or DayZ, or it might end up being a huge flop like the day before. We'll have to wait and see. Another one only just literally announced, Blackfrost, The Long Dark 2 is happening. It's going to be adding co-op multiplayer to the game for the first time and is scheduled for 2026. A brand new area and locations to discover with more emphasis on big town exploration perhaps, as well as the ability to use mounts. In every shape way conceivable, it seems to be improving and adding on what players have always wanted in the original Long Dark, one of the oldest and most developed survival games going. Now, of course, the Long Dark is still technically not finished. People are still waiting for the last story episode to release, hopefully in 2025. This will be another game that goes through the early access ringer, and I'm a bit dubious about following along for the ride, given the history of delays and length of time it's taken to get the Long Dark where it is. No doubt one of the best survival games going, but there's still a limit to my patience about how much I want to cover a game and wait for new content. But no doubt about it, this game will be huge when it does release. And of course, finishing off with Ark 2, originally announced back in 2020 with a tentative release date potentially of 2022. Obviously that's far gone now. We were kind of hoping for news in 2024, but things have gone even more quiet, with Wildcard almost on the brink of extinction with some of the problems and issues it had with its remaster and just trying to stay afloat. Its publisher is the bad guy here, always investing and wasting their money on all sorts of nonsense. But there is still a huge amount of people that believe in the Ark franchise. They loved the animated show, some didn't. They're hopeful for some maybe movies with old Big Vin Diesel, but people mostly just want a semi-decent sequel. I think given we've had no new news this year, I can't imagine this releasing in 2025, and we'll be lucky if it actually sees the light of day in 2026. It's meant to be a revision of what we know about Ark, offering a God of War style like story with old Vin Diesel, but still having the other survival elements that you've come to know and love and ways to play. It will still have multiplayer and a focus on PvP, all set on a brand new planet in the Ark lore, filled with more new dinosaurs, lush biomes and harsh areas to go and live. So yeah, all them issues, all the problems, I still had to include it. I've got a huge history with Ark over the years, and while it's become one of my most hated games since of all the developments that's gone on, I'm still hopeful that Ark 2 will bring the good times back to open world crafting survival. And there we go. If there's any games I've missed, I'm sure I have, let me know which ones I should have put in this video. But do make sure you go and watch my 21 survival adventure crafting games first, as I'm sure some will be on that list. I will break down a lot of these games in separate videos over the coming years, so make sure you're tuned in. You've got notification bell ding to hear about every survival game release you need to know, and I'll see you right back for more list videos very soon.